So let's see what it says. It's all 69%. I see some folks coming in this morning. We're going to be looking at some post-resurrection appearances. Jesus has died, but early Sunday morning, everything changed. We're going to start in Matthew chapter 28. All four Gospels record the women at the tomb. You can see on the screen there, John 20, verse 1, just one little verse, talks about that. We're going to be spending our time looking at the first people to go to the tomb and discover it's empty. They are not the first people to see the resurrected Lord. That honor, however, will go to a woman. Why is that so important? Why is that so significant that the women are the ones who discovered the empty tomb? I'm getting lots of answers. Say that again? Absolutely. We're going to talk about that in a moment. But also, you were saying it? All right, women were not given much credence. So they go back to the apostles, and the apostles go, he's raised from the tomb's empty? Really? He's raised from the dead? That's what the angel told you? I'm giving away the whole story, aren't I? And the apostles go, yay! What do? They didn't believe him. In part because they didn't take the evidence of women. You think they had a little more faith? Well, let's talk about that. I'm going to tell you, when I first started trying to write this material, I'd published The Big Picture with 21st Century Christian. They wanted the life of Christ. Time went by, and I started with the end. I started with the post-resurrection appearances, and I taught this. This is material I have taught. Of course, I keep embellishing it and adding to it. And I was really enthralled that the folks there in Houston that I interacted with, they loved this series. And I've been so excited to finally get to this point because we are slowing down. I regret that we had to take swaths of Luke's material and try to wade through it because we're trying to get through this in a timely manner. A year. We've been looking at the life of Jesus 6 months, took a break for 6 months, and we're nearing the end of another 6-month period, almost an entire year. We could have spent 3 years, 10 years. But here we are looking at the post-resurrection appearances. And this is where I started writing. This is what finally got me going. And I absolutely love being able to slow down and look at these sections. When I was a kid, went through a survey of the life of Christ. It had gone on so long, we kind of got to the end and said, let's hurry up. But what we're going to see, and I know you're good Bible students, you know this already, there are so many wonderful, delightful details in the post-resurrection appearances of Jesus. Another interesting feature is they're kind of messy, the way they're presented to us. I don't think Matthew said, hey, Mark, how are you going to put all this? Hey, Luke, what are you going to say? These are vibrant, first-person accounts that are being recorded for us. And the first one is the women at the tomb. So I've asked you to turn to Matthew 28. I actually want you to go back just a few verses and remind ourselves of the burial of Jesus. And you see in verse 57 of Matthew 27, Joseph of Arimathea, at evening, as the sun is going down, he says, we got to take the body down. You can't leave a dead body out, because that's what the law of Moses says. You can't leave it overnight. And they hurriedly bury the body. Who helps Joseph of Arimathea? We don't know this from Matthew, Mark, or Luke's accounts, but we do from John's account. Nicodemus. And what do these guys hurriedly put together out of great reverence? Spices. Extremely expensive. Why do you put spices with a dead body? Well, okay. And they're doing this hurriedly because the sun is going down. What's the next day, though? It's the Sabbath. It's a high Sabbath. It's the start of the Feast of Unleavened Bread. So what are the women having to do at home on the Sabbath? Prepare. Part of the feast. And then they come as soon as they possibly can to the tomb, because men can't do anything right. They have to redo it, bury him properly. There's just, I didn't hear what you said, and I don't think I want to. Oh, yeah, right. What are the women concerned about? What are they worried about? Are they worried about the tomb being empty? That's the last thing on their mind. Jesus is dead. But they're worried about how to get in. You've read this before, haven't you? Okay. Well, in verse 62, we see that the next day, the day after the day of preparation, the chief priests and the Pharisees gathered before Pilate and said, "Sir, we remember how the impostor," that's how they refer to Jesus, "the impostor said, while he was still alive, 'After 3 days I will rise.' Therefore, order the tomb to be made secure until the 3rd day, lest his disciples go and steal him away and tell the people, 'He is risen from the dead.' And the last fraud will be worse than the first." Pilate said to them, "You have a guard of soldiers. Go, make it as secure as you can." So they went and made the tomb secure by sealing the stone and setting a guard. This is a Roman marker, seal, a Roman seal. And a big old stone is there. Well, the women, I skipped verse 61. I meant to start there. Verse 61 says, Mary Magdalene, the other Mary, were there sitting opposite the tomb. When they go to the tomb, it's empty. And one of the theories that people throw out there saying, the resurrection didn't really happen. The tomb was empty because the women went to the wrong tomb. But you look at the details that are given to us. It's a private cemetery. Joseph of Arimathea, this is his tomb. This is his family's tomb. It's going to be marked. They're going to know. But besides that, Mary Magdalene and the other Mary, there are a lot of Marys running around in the first century world, not just Jesus' mother. But they are there at the tomb. They know where Jesus is buried. They can't come the next day, but they come Sunday. Let's start reading. We're going to read verses 1 through 8 of Matthew 28. Now, after the Sabbath, toward the dawn of the first day of the week, Mary Magdalene and the other Mary, they were just mentioned in verse 61 of chapter 27, they went to see the tomb. And behold, there was a great earthquake, for an angel of the Lord descended from heaven and came and rolled back the stone and sat on it. His appearance was like lightning, his clothing white as snow. And for fear of him, the guards trembled and became like dead men. But the angel said to the women, "Do not be afraid, for I know that you seek Jesus who was crucified. He is not here, for he is risen. As he said, come, see the place where he lay. Then go quickly and tell his disciples that he is risen from the dead. And behold, they need to tell them, he is going before you to Galilee. There you will see him. See, I have told you. So they departed quickly from the tomb with fear and great joy. Remember that, fear and great joy, and ran to tell his disciples. All right, we're going to stop. We're going to stop there. Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John tell about several different post-resurrection appearances. Some overlap, like the women coming to the tomb. Others don't. There's not a parallel for all of these. And we'll talk about that as we go through this. Today, we're just focusing on this appearance as we look at Matthew 28's account, verses 1 through 8, Mark 16, 1 through 8, Luke 24, 1 through 8, and the first verse of John chapter 20. What do you see in these verses? What strikes you in Matthew 28, 1 through 8? Okay, at dawn, toward the dawn of the first day. I mean, as soon as the new day starts, they want to be there. But the tomb's already empty. Jesus is an early riser, isn't he? He was throughout his ministry. And they come there to the tomb. Is there any mention about them saying, well, maybe we went to the wrong tomb? No, they know this is the right tomb, especially when they see the angel sitting on the stone. Tell me about that. Tell me about verses 2 through 4 here. How significant is this? The soldiers who were there. What happens if they lose whatever they're guarding? Yeah. In fact, they are fearful of that, and the religious leaders, the Sadducees, chief priests, they say, don't worry, we will handle Pilate, we will take care of this, but this is what you're supposed to tell people. And I'm getting ahead of myself a little bit. In fact, verse 11, why don't we just take a look at that real quickly? Matthew 28, 11 through 15 tells us that some of the guard went into the city, told the chief priests what had happened. They assembled with the elders and taking counsel, they gave a sufficient sum of money to the soldiers and said, tell people, oh, his disciples came by night and stole him away while we were asleep. And if it comes to the governor's ears, if it comes to Pilate's ears, we will satisfy him and keep you out of trouble. So they take the money. And that's the story that was spread around. How likely is that? Let's talk about that in a second. I see two hands. Did I see a hand here? Okay. Right, right. And if there's guards, that means somebody could stand guard while the others slept if they needed to. Yes, ma'am. Okay, so how can these guys ignore the fact that an angel came, rolled away the stone? Powerful, strong angel. I've got lots of hands going up here. Go ahead, Glenn. I saw you first, but I've got others here. Why would they tell this? They have nothing to gain, and they have everything to lose. Yes, sir. Yeah, and it's embarrassing. They could not deny them. Right, right, right. And we've seen that all throughout his ministry. Okay. And it seems to me that they knew better than Jesus' own disciples what he said and what he meant by, I'm going to die and then I'm going to be raised from the dead. Now, here's the scenario. Just imagine this. And I know we talked about this a few weeks ago when we looked at 1 Corinthians 15. But imagine where it says that he died according to the Scriptures, he was raised according to the Scriptures. Well, how do we know that? Because we have first-hand accounts that tell us this is what happened. You had Roman soldiers. You had soldiers who were standing there, and they fall asleep. And then the apostles come, and they tiptoe. They tiptoe. Shh, Andrew, quiet. Don't step on that twig. Okay. And then they have to move this humongous, large stone out of the way. Real quiet-like. How likely is that? Ridiculous. Now, are you scratching your hair again? Okay. I don't remember what that was. 2 through 4. When they saw the angel. Ah. All right. We're going to talk about that. We're going to talk about that fear. Now, that's why I wanted to emphasize in verse 8, they departed quickly. The women departed quickly from the tomb with fear. So they had fear. I mean, who wouldn't? And great joy. And ran to the disciples. We're not told then how they were rejected immediately. In fact, what we see next is the resurrected Lord appearing to the women. But we're not going to talk about that right now. We're going to save that for later. All right, I'm going to go over to Mark 16 now. And let's keep in mind what we've seen here, because we're going to see a lot of the repeat of information, but with a different emphasis. Mark 16, verse 1 says that the Sabbath had passed. Mary Magdalene, we're given more women here. We're told about more women. Mary Magdalene, Mary the mother of James, and Salome bought spices so that they might go and anoint him. And very early on the first day of the week, when the sun had risen, they went to the tomb. And they were saying to one another, just like they were in Matthew's account, who will roll away the stone for us from the entrance of the tomb? And looking up, they saw that the stone had been rolled back. It was very large, muy grande. And entering the tomb, they saw a young man sitting on the right side, dressed in a white robe, and they were alarmed. Does it call him an angel here? It does not, but Matthew's account did, and we can kind of figure out, yeah, this guy's something special. And he said to them, do not be alarmed. You seek Jesus of Nazareth, who was crucified. He is risen. He is not here. See the place where they laid him. So that's a new detail right there. But go, tell his disciples and Peter that he is going before you to Galilee. There you will see him just as he told you. Well, that's some information we've seen. However, there's a name that is distinguished from the other disciples. Go tell his disciples and Peter. Why is Peter singled out? Okay, all 4 Gospels record Peter's threefold denial of Jesus. I don't know the man. I don't know what you're talking about. And then verse 8, they went out and fled from the tomb, for trembling and astonishment had seized them. And they said nothing to anyone, for they were afraid. Notice Mark's account does not mention joy, but emphasizes the fear that these women have. We'll talk about that in just a few minutes. I want to go over to Luke's account, Luke 24. It's kind of nice that we can look at all 4 Gospels together and point out some of the differences between them. Luke 24, 1 through 8. But on the first day of the week, at early dawn, they went to the tomb, taking the spices they had prepared. They found the stone rolled away from the tomb. But when they went in, they did not find the body of the Lord Jesus. While they were perplexed about this, behold, 2 men stood by them in dazzling apparel. And as they were frightened and bowed their faces to the ground, the men said to them, why do you seek the living among the dead? He is not here, but he has risen. Remember how he told you while he was still in Galilee, that the Son of Man must be delivered into the hands of sinful men and be crucified and on the third day rise. And they remembered his words. And we're gonna stop there. Then they go and tell the 11, and that's more to the story that we're going to look at. Then we're going to look at right now. And I'll just read to you. You don't have to turn to John 20, verse 1. But here's what John 20, verse 1 says before turning it over to Peter and the beloved disciple. Now, on the first day of the week, Mary Magdalene came to the tomb early, while it was still dark, and saw that the stone had been taken away from the tomb. And then she goes and reports to Peter and the one whom Jesus loved. John 20, verse 2. Oh, I didn't highlight that. Yes. In Luke 24? Okay, Luke 24, verse 10. I don't think so. Yeah. All right. We get a bunch of names now when we start looking at these different accounts. A lot of similar details. There are some new details. How many women are there? He says, and others. So as we try to piece this together, this is Luke's account, and others. Go ahead.
And the interesting thing about Luke's account is his was not written at the same time.
Right. Now, but also in defense of Matthew and Mark, they're not necessarily trying to give us all the details of everything. For example, Luke says there's two men, and John will also talk about two angels in the tomb. Matthew and Mark don't mention two, they just mention one. Is that a contradiction? One's sitting on the stone, and there's two inside. I don't know if that means there's a total of three. These are vibrant accounts. So as you can see there at the very end, other women are mentioned in Luke's account. Let me run through these names. Mary Magdalene, do we know who that is? Okay, we know who Mary Magdalene is. Mary, the mother of James the Less, he's sometimes called James the Younger. Maybe he was just shorter. Be that as it may. Mary. Salome. Well, who's Salome? Okay. Joanna. These are different women. Luke's gospel, more than the other three, emphasized the role of women in the ministry of Jesus. And I'm going to take us back to Luke 8, verses 1 through 3. The 12 are with Jesus, and some women who had been healed of evil spirits and infirmities. Mary, called Magdalene, from whom 7 demons had gone out. Joanna, the wife of Chuza, Herod's household manager. So here's somebody who's got some political connections, and yet she has aligned herself with Jesus. Susanna and many others. Listen to this. They provided for them out of their means. Now, the highlighted women are specifically mentioned in these other gospel accounts. And what is it that these women did throughout Jesus' ministry? They, say it again? Okay, financially. These are well-to-do women. One has political connections in Herod Antipas's household. And they're helping Jesus throughout his ministry.
I also have the feeling, too, not just financially, I believe.
Well, and we see that. We see that at times. Here's the end of Mark's account, Mark 15. There were also women looking on from a distance from the tomb. We emphasize how Matthew mentions the 2 women. But here are Mary Magdalene, Mary the mother of James the Younger, and of Joseph, and Salome. So we keep getting some recurring names. I will emphasize this because I think it's so beautiful and powerful. The first person to see the resurrected Lord is a woman. It's one of these women. Which one is it? Mary Magdalene, in a precious scene in John 20 that we'll look at in a couple of weeks. We're getting close. We're getting close. These women dedicated themselves to Jesus. They followed him and ministered to him. Now tell me about the social situation for women in the first century world. Do they have a lot of freedoms? Okay. And yet here they are doing what they can behind the scenes. Maybe they're not literally following Jesus, walking in his footsteps, being one of his disciples, and yet they are his disciples. So they would have heard that. Okay. Absolutely. Right. Let's go back to what Antia was saying. Say it again for everybody. Just now. Just now. How they would have heard Jesus say a lot of his teachings. Right. And only Luke's gospel really emphasizes that they're always there behind the scenes. All right. I bring up this slide because it's emphasized in Matthew, Mark, and Luke. And I know I've mentioned this several times throughout our study. I just want to make sure we all have it in our heads. Jesus told his disciples, not once, not twice, but 3 times, he is going to go to Jerusalem. He is going to be killed. He is going to then be raised from the dead. The Dutterhead disciples, the apostles, Peter, Andrew, James, John, did they get it? Obviously not. They were completely disillusioned. I wonder if the women had a better understanding. The religious leaders certainly did. The impostor said he's going to rise from the dead. And these guys, when they hear Jesus has been raised from the dead, they didn't go, an angel? I mean, an angel or somebody with really bright clothing? Really? They didn't do that. They just despaired.
Don't you think part of it was the disciples didn't?
Okay. And that's what blinded them. And we see that. When throughout Jesus' ministry, the apostles were constantly arguing about who was going to be at Jesus' right hand and left hand in his kingdom, who was going to have the most power, who was going to be the most influential and important among them. Even the night when they're eating the supper, they're still arguing about that. When you put the gospel accounts together, we talked about that. I want to, it's probably the last time we'll mention this at all. But all 3 gospels, Matthew, Mark, and Luke, all 3 synoptic gospels, all 3 mention all 3 predictions. These guys heard it, they knew it, and yet it went in one ear and out the other. Yes, ma'am. I can be emotional. Well, that is true. I, Amanda, did you concur with that idea that women are more emotionally connected? I see some women going, oh, I'm not sure about it. We're both. We're both. Yeah, we're connected. And just to emphasize, piggybacking off what you're saying, when the women went and told the disciples, this is what we heard, this is what we saw, it's what we were told to do, they didn't believe it. Because I think, in part, for sure, they saw these are women, they're emotional, what do they know? Keep that in mind. All right, for the last few minutes of our class, I want us to go back to Mark 16. Mark chapter 16, as we make some application to ourselves. You know about this. Starting in verse 9 of Mark 16 through the end of the chapter, verse 20, I have brackets around these verses. Do you see a bracket or some sort of highlight? Hey, you need to note this. Verses 9 through 20. What is going on here? Why are these bracketed in most, if not all, of our Bibles?
Some of the earliest manuscripts do not include these verses.
Okay. Some of the early manuscripts from the 3rd and 4th centuries do not have these verses. John, were you going to say?
Yes.
Okay. So you go to the Sinaiticus or the Vaticanus, Alexandrinus, codexes, and it's what does it mean then? What it means is Mark 16, verse 8 is it. That's the end. Well, what does that mean? Are verses 9 through 20 not written by Mark? And in scholarship, biblical scholars who have dedicated their lives to studying the manuscripts, and many who believe very strongly in the inspiration of the Bible. There are a lot of Bible scholars who don't, but a lot of them are divided. They're divided. Are these verses? In fact, there's another ending that's in some other manuscripts. Some manuscripts include after verse 8 the following: but they reported briefly to Peter and those with him all that they had been told, and after this Jesus himself went out by means of them from east to west, the sacred and imperishable proclamation of eternal salvation. And they don't have what we have here in verses 9 through 20. So that's one of the great things about a Bible that has footnotes, that has references, side column or footnotes at the bottom, and use those. They're invaluable. What is traditionally accepted is verses 9 through 20. And I don't want to argue right now, oh, these aren't part of the original. Maybe they are, maybe they aren't. But let's look at Mark 16, verses 6 through 8, and imagine this is it. This is how Mark's gospel ends. At least it does at verse 8. Verse 9 tells us the happy ending that Jesus is raised from the dead. Let me ask you this first. The people who were reading Mark in the first century, did they not know the rest of the story? Of course they did. What is Mark getting at here, if indeed he is stopping at verse 8? What is the emphasis here? The Savior is risen. Tell his disciples. Tell them. Tell Peter. He is going before you to Galilee. There you will see him just as he told you. See those words I have highlighted? That same word is used in verse 8 when it says that they said nothing to anyone because they were afraid. Tell his disciples. They told nothing to no one.
No one outside of the disciples.
All right, but that's not what Mark's gospel says, that they didn't tell anyone outside of their disciples. Let me remind you of this. We've studied Mark's gospel. It's been 2 or 3 years now. But Mark's gospel gives the impression that the disciples of Jesus, specifically the apostles, were dudderheads. They never got it. What good, positive thing is said about any of the apostles in Mark's gospel? One time, in Mark 8, you have Peter saying, I believe you are the Christ, the Son of God. And then in the very next section, he's saying, you're not going to go to the cross and die. there is nothing good, commendable said about the apostles in Mark's gospel. Does that mean they didn't ever do anything good or positive? Well, no, but that's Mark's focus. His focus is on how they didn't get it. Yes, ma'am. Well, yes and no. You remember the comments made by Peter at the end of 1 Peter that he and Mark he's like a son to Peter. And, okay, but this is inspired. You're not going to deny that Mark's writing by inspiration. He's writing, Mark's gospel, it's the shortest of the four, and sometimes it gets a bad rap because almost every incident in Mark's gospel is also recorded in Matthew, Luke, and John. What do we need Mark's gospel for? It is a unique presentation. And it has Jesus high on a pedestal. He's perfect in every way. Well, all four gospels present that. But the disciples can do nothing right in this gospel. Here at the very end, what is emphasized with the women, and one other thing I need to tell you to remind you is Mark's gospel emphasizes terms like this: people being amazed at Jesus and being fearful and terrified all the time. Yes, sir.
I was going to say, maybe it's a challenge to the reader.
Okay. Doesn't mean the women didn't have faith. Doesn't mean the apostles didn't have faith. But I think that's exactly what Mark is getting at. What are you going to do? Do you believe Jesus is the Christ? Do you believe that he was raised from the dead? Okay. What are you going to do about it? They said nothing to no one. They were afraid. That's the last word in verse 8. They were afraid. That word has been used throughout the Gospel of Mark. Fear. Does it say anything about their joy? Yay! I'm fearful. This is crazy, but I'm excited. It doesn't mention that. Matthew does. Luke does. They're excited. But Mark doesn't talk about that. He only emphasizes the fear. What is the challenge to us? What are we going to do with this news about Jesus? Are we going to tell nothing to no one? What do you think? What do you think about Mark's presentation? Okay. Why are we fearful? What are we afraid of? We're afraid of being rejected. We're afraid of our friends, what they're going to think. What's the challenge here?
Every time we did something.
Okay. We're like the women too. Okay. Does the presentation given to us in Matthew 28, Mark 16, Luke 24, John 20, does it bolster our faith when we see the details that are given to us? If this is a court of law, prove that Jesus really did rise from the dead. Well, we don't have physical evidence. There's no tomb. There's no body. But we have evidence. We have testimony. Yes, let me tell you, I went to the tomb. There was an angel there. I saw him. He said, "Why seek the living among the dead?" We as Christians have acknowledged our faith in Christ to be the Son of God who died on the cross of Calvary and rose from the dead. Yes, sir.
We can link other incidents in history.
Yeah. How many of you have ever seen Abraham Lincoln? Yeah, I saw a photo of him. Well, come on. Photos can be photoshopped. How do we know that's really him? How many of you have ever met someone who said, "I met Abraham Lincoln"? Do you believe Abraham Lincoln lived Mr. Walker, historian?
Yes, sir.
Yeah. Why? We have overwhelming evidence, right? We have his handwriting. We have documents that he's written. And plus, I saw him in that Bill and Ted's movie. He was in that, wasn't he? Yeah. Jesus Christ rose from the dead, and his first disciples had a host of emotions. What would you have done if you had been one of these women and you went to the tomb? Would you have said nothing to anyone initially? Now they do. They do go to the disciples and tell them. But this is what Mark emphasizes. At first, they were fearful and afraid.
Just consider what they saw and just the visual aspect of it.
Yeah. Right. It doesn't say what they're afraid of. And one of those might have been the reaction of the disciples, says the Christ, the Son of God. And I want to encourage you to study with me about this. Go to church at Parkway, where I worship, and tell people about the opportunity they have to know firsthand the resurrected Lord. Let's look toward the other post-resurrection appearances. We've seen the women at the tomb. Next will be Peter and the beloved disciple. I emphasize that because that's what the text says, but we believe this is the Apostle John. Peter and John, we'll be looking at that next week. 2 weeks from now, we will be looking at Mary Magdalene, as I'm calling it, session 22. We have a total of 26 sessions. 23, one of the most beloved of them all, the two on the road to Emmaus, Luke 24. We're going to spend an entire class period just on that. We're going to combine the 10 without Thomas, and then 8 days later, which would be the following Sunday, the 10 with Thomas, John 20. All these events that we're looking at here occur on Resurrection Sunday. Jesus had a busy day. He had a busy day. The two on Emmaus was in the evening, or as it was getting to be evening, and then they go to Jerusalem and tell all the apostles. So we'll be looking at that. Jesus had a busy Sunday. What did he do Monday through Saturday? We don't know. We're not told what he did, but we do know the following Sunday he was with the disciples. I want to close our class by looking at these words here. And tell me when they occurred. We know this song. We've sung it all of our lives. We gazed on in the open tomb, where once thy mangled body lay. What is that referring to? The women, Peter and John, nor saw thee in that upper room. That's not the Lord's Supper. That's when the disciples, in fear, are up in an upper room, hiding out. Maybe it's the same upper room, probably not. But they're hiding. And then Jesus comes in. Tell me about the door. It was shut. More than that, it had a deadbolt on it. How did Jesus get in? Okay. Jesus went through a wall? Or just... Nor met thee on the open way. What's that referring to? The road to Emmaus. But we believe that angel said to the women, why seek the living with the dead? We gaze not in the open tomb, where once thy mangled body lay, nor saw thee in that open room, nor met thee on that open way. But we believe that angel said, Why seek the living with the dead? But we believe that angel said, why seek the living with the dead? Next week, Peter and John at the tomb. Thank you.